Welcome to Pedo Teeth Talk, brought to you by the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry, a podcast show that delivers cutting-edge ideas for the professionals specializing in pediatric dentistry.
Thank you for tuning in to Pedo Teeth Talk, where we bring you the contemporary issues important to you and your practice. Brought to you by the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry. I am your host, Joel Berg, and thank you to our Pedo Teeth Talk sponsor, Hugh Freedy, for helping us bring you great content. We couldn't do this without them. Visit them at www.hughfreedy.com. That's H-U-F-R-I-E-D-Y.com. We're here today with Mike Gilliland to talk about his work to support some of the most important work that the AAPD does year after year in Washington, D.C. Mike is senior counsel in the government relations practice at the D.C. law firm of Hogan Lovells. Before joining Hogan, Mike served as counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee and as legislative director to Senator Howell Heflin of Alabama. Mike assists clients in obtaining federal funding for projects, programs, and research. As a leader of the firm's federal funding and appropriations practice for over 25 years, Mike has designed and implemented strategies to secure millions of dollars in federal funds for hundreds of projects. Mike has directed federal funding efforts for Title VII, university construction and research projects, hospital expansions, education programs, and economic development initiatives, as well as public transportation facilities, airports, new technology programs, and defense procurement. Mike's comprehensive knowledge of the annual federal budget process, the grants awarded by federal agencies, and the congressional budget and appropriations process gives him an edge in helping clients to achieve their legislative, regulatory, and policy goals. Working closely with House and Senate committees and federal agency officials, he thoroughly understands the political process that governs federal spending. Mike also counsels clients on legislative and policy matters involving tax, energy, health, telecommunication, insurance, and other matters. In his tax policy practice, Mike lobbies the congressional tax committees and federal regulators to advance the client's tax-related interests. He combines technical know-how and an in-depth understanding of the congressional tax process to help clients solve their most difficult tax problems. As leader of the firm's political law and government ethics practice, Mike helps businesses, individuals, associations, and groups understand and comply with the complex legal and regulatory framework involving state and federal election laws, lobbying disclosure, government ethics, and pay-to-play laws. Mike represents clients before the Federal Election Commission and has formed corporate PACs and non-connected PACs for a diverse range of clients. He regularly speaks to groups and organizations across the country on federal and state election laws. Mike, thank you so much for being with us today.
Joel, thank you so much. It's great to be with you this morning.
Well, Mike, I've known you for many years, as has a large portion of our members, but many of our members who have heard of you haven't gotten to meet you, and you do incredible things with us on the APD, and I thought we would start by having you just give us the background of how you started as counsel to APD, and maybe get into the origins of the Title VII program, which we all know a fair amount about. So let's have a conversation about your involvement with APD historically, and then how that's gotten us to Title VII training funding.
Sure. Well, thanks, Joel. Yes. We were hired by AAPD around 20 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long, but it has. And Kate Smith, who works with me in our government affairs group at the firm, the two of us have been the two primary people at the firm that have worked closely with the AAPD. So we were brought in to help on appropriations and funding issues and other related issues. But I think that the appropriations was probably the primary issue that I think the Academy was looking for at the time we were hired. So after we were hired, Kate and I huddled with Scott and with the great and legendary Heber Simmons and started to think through things that we might be able to do that could be, directly helpful to pediatric dentists. And so one of the things that Scott came up with was an idea of possibly getting funds through Congress directed toward pediatric dentistry training programs. And we started looking at that and looked at Title VII, which obviously had been around for a long time. Title VII was a broad program, and almost no programs were specifically set aside under Title VII. That is, it was very broadly funded, so nothing very specific under Title VII. And we thought maybe we should try to work with Congress to get specific funding set aside under Title VII for pediatric dentistry training programs. And that was the very first year we came up with a request for $8 million for Title VII funding. Kate and I, working with Heber, worked with the House and Senate Appropriations Committees. And in that first year, we were successful in being the first group to get money actually set aside in the House and Senate Appropriations bills for dentistry. And since that time, we've been successful in getting funding every single year under Title VII for pediatric dentistry training programs, $8 million and then $10 million and then $12 million now. And it really adds up to about $140 million over the years that we've been working on this. And in that time, it did expand the language that we received from Congress to include dental faculty loan repayment. Again, a very successful part of this effort. So it's been terrific. It's been successful. I think it's done a lot of good for children across this country. And again, I just want to get another shout out to the great Heber Simmons, who we've worked so closely with over all of those years. One of the finest people I've ever known, and a terrific lobbyist, though he doesn't call himself a lobbyist, so I don't do that. But he is really a wonderful, wonderful person and a great lobbyist. So we've been very fortunate to work directly with him. So, yeah, that's sort of the story of Title VII, Joel.
Yeah, that's great, and I will concur on Heber Simmons. The legendary is an accurate description. I think our work may not have come to the result it has today without Heber together with you, and he's an amazing person and a mentor to all of us. So I think we can honor him through the conversation today.
Terrific.
By continuing to talk about this and Title VII and the successes we've had. I'm going to come back to the Title VII funding and ask you about the future of that, but I want to momentarily get into the impact of COVID-19 on your work and also as it relates to Title VII. When I get into some questions for you on that, what it's catalyzed for the future. But maybe first you could talk a little bit about how do you do your job now with COVID-19, and how does that impact our representing us as APD?
That's a very good question, Joel, and we're still working that out, by the way. But yes, this has been a year like no other. I've been in D.C. for since 1981, and of course, there's never been a year like this, where Congress essentially shut its doors in mid-March to anyone outside of Congress. And most offices were vacant on Capitol Hill for many, many, many weeks. People started trickling back in after a while. But as far as anyone going to the Hill, going to Congress to meet with members and staff, that's just not happening. Likely won't happen until sometime next year. So yes, that's very different. Typically, what I would do, what Heber does, we would meet with members of Congress, we would meet with staff on a regular basis to push the Academy's agenda, whether it's the Title VII, tax issue, whatever it might be. But we would be having meetings on a regular basis with staff, face-to-face, and that's how Heber likes to do it. That's the only way I know to do it. But that's not happening. So after the first few weeks of the Capitol essentially being closed down, we started learning more and more about Zoom. And before long, I was talking to staff and members of Congress on Zoom, having these virtual discussions. It was touch and go at first, but as we became more accustomed to that technology, it actually has worked out pretty well. So instead of meeting face-to-face with members, we're having Zoom calls. And I think it's worked out very well. But life is certainly different in this city. The restaurants are generally closed unless they can serve outside. Downtown, our office has been closed since mid-March. Most offices downtown are closed. So if you drive downtown during the week, you would think it's Sunday morning because there's very little traffic, very few people on the street in D.C., and that's the same up with Congress. So yes, very, very, very different. But I will say that so on the appropriations side of things, which is how Title VII is funded, Obviously, this has all impacted that, but really the elections have an impact on legislation generally. In an election year, you see legislation either being put on hold or going much more slowly. So this year, for example, the House has passed all of its appropriations bill, all of its bills, and the Academy got the full funding that it asked for Title VII, $12 million in the House bill. But the Senate hasn't moved a single appropriations bill, and will likely not do that until after the election. So that probably has more to do with the elections than with the pandemic. But I think all of that together has meant that there's just been a slowdown on Capitol Hill of legislation moving.
Yeah, I think having the long-term relationship we've had with you and with Heber has been quite impactful for us, having that infrastructure of communication in place, that it impacted us a lot less than others who are maybe developing relationships with the legislature. I wanted to also follow up on, what you said about Heber and his not seeming like a lobbyist. And I would agree. And I think in some way wouldn't you agree that the best lobbyist is one who doesn't seem like one? And, in that regard, Heber used to remind us, he does remind us still today, and Scott, who's helping us and our leadership as a whole, that one of our successes is because we're not out for ourselves. We're there for kids. And you would hear Heber say that, and all of us many times. Maybe you could briefly just touch on the fact that we are the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry and that we're about children, helping children, not about helping ourselves.
Absolutely. And that has been critical in the success of the Academy. And I could talk about this for a long, long time, but let me just make a couple of points. First off, the Academy never asked for more money than we can absolutely spend. And that's unique in this city. If $10 million is what it will take, what we can use, that's what we'll ask for. So people on the Hill, people in Congress know that about the Academy. They know that if we say this is what we need, it's truly what we need, and that we come back every year and talk about what that has meant for dental students, what it has meant for children, the funding that Congress has provided. So we're able to show Congress real results, real impacts on people's lives. And of course, Heber, that's what he talks about right off the bat. I'm here for the children. He'll say right at the beginning, I'm here for the kids. This is all about helping children. And it's a great message. It's been so well received from early on. And I think we've got an amazing coalition of support on Capitol Hill for all of those reasons. And just one more comment on Heber not really being a lobbyist. If you walk down the halls of Congress with Heber, something that happens to him that happens to no other lobbyist, people will come out of their offices and give him a big hug as if he were family. You don't see lobbyists getting hugs from members of Congress and staff.
Right.
And Heber, he has that kind of relationship. I mean, people just love him. So he has that kind of relationship with people. And it's terrific to see. And
I think when Heber has passed the baton on to others and we're continuing to learn, and I think that's probably the most important learning, that, it's about the relationships.
Yes.
And it's about that we represent children. It has nothing to do with our own political or personal beliefs. Yes. And I think that's transparent, and people can see that regardless of our backgrounds, our personal situation, we all are together on representing kids, and that's where the hugs come from.
Absolutely.
The authenticity.
Absolutely. 100%.
We will now pause for a word from our sponsor. Hugh Freedy is the global leader in dental instrument manufacturing, offering pediatric restorative solutions that keep you performing at your best. For more information on Hugh Freedy products, visit www.hughfreedy.com/AAPD crowns.
We are back with Mike Gilliland. We're having a wonderful conversation talking about the work that the APD has done in D.C. that has helped us with the Title VII program, amongst other things. And Mike, I want to follow up on the Title VII program and specifically about the possibility of expansion of funding and also new directions. And as a preface to your response, we've had a lot of conversations ourselves about the impact of COVID-19 from the education standpoint, what the Commission on Dental Accreditation is doing, from the disruption of practice standpoint, the business of practice, all kinds of things, and the pediatric dentists that are just graduating and how to help them, along with the Title VII funding as it has been. So my question is, are there opportunities to expand this? And I'm going to get specific with you after you initially respond, and expand it in total dollars, but maybe more importantly, in the direction of the funding. As you said, we started with the expansion of programs. We've moved into loan forgiveness, which will continue to be important, that part. But what about room for additional areas of funding?
Absolutely. I think we're so well poised to expand the programs that we're requesting on Capitol Hill. We've been very consistent over the years. We've really not deviated from our request very much, other than to add loan forgiveness to our request a few years ago. But yes, I think we're very well poised to do more. And we have a new Congress being sworn in next year, possibly a new administration, but definitely a new Congress. And I think that's a really good time to examine where we want to go from here, and particularly with the impacts of the pandemic, what we've seen from the pandemic and the impact that has had on small business and practices and education and you name it. So definitely we have, I think, every opportunity to do more and to be creative and to do things that can really, really help people.
That's fantastic. And I could see a natural tie-in to the existing Title VII directionally. For example, distance learning, that's become a necessity. Before it was kind of a cool thing and it was desirable, and now it's a necessity, and has been the mother of invention. We have seen, for example, one or more of our programs host training for all of the residents in the country simultaneously. It was something that we wanted to do to access experts in other locales, but just never in our busy lives got around to it. But to do that in perpetuity may require some funding. So if you look at that as an example, could you see, and we're just hypothesizing here, this doesn't represent any official positions.
Certainly.
Just me talking to you and asking, do you think something like distance learning, in pointing out the need for it and helping us in pediatric dentistry, is something that we could get funding around?
Absolutely. And again, this is a new world, and I think we're learning so much from during this pandemic about what we can't do, don't know. I think going forward, this is going to be a key issue that the government, that Congress, the Department of Education is going to look closely at to see what we can do to be better prepared in the future. But I also think that we're looking at possibly at distance learning, not just in a time of crisis, but maybe that becomes more of a norm going forward. So yes, I think distance learning, we see funding in the HEROES Act that the House has taken up, the $2 trillion HEROES Act. There is funding for K-12 schools, I think around $27 billion for K-12, around that same amount for higher ed. And part of that funding is to try to improve distance learning and to give schools the tools they need for that. So yes, that is definitely going to be an issue that the new Congress and the administration, whether it's the new administration or the old administration, will look closely at next year.
Look forward to following up with you on that, Mike. I think there's going to be a lot of excitement around not only how it will benefit us in pediatric dentistry, but be an example for others that in our group we can do it, and then others could do it the same, and it'll improve everyone's opportunities. Another big item that's been talked about a lot, of course, during COVID in terms of potential funding in the future is around infection control. I've hosted some town halls and other podcasts with AAPD members and experts on how we have managed through this COVID crisis. And it's been very challenging to the whole world and also to pediatric dentists and our members. And, we struggle with infection control on one hand and getting it right, but we're also the experts. We've done this right for a long time, way back since 1983, when AIDS was introduced and infection control began. So we're good at this. But what we don't have, what we've come to the conclusion to, is enough information, enough science to answer a lot of important questions, like how is COVID spread in the practice? And for us as pediatric dentists, turns out with children, seasonal influenza may be much more important than COVID. So we all have identified the absence of adequate research about transmission of disease, infection control, PPE in the dental practice, which is really an important point of care. So what do you see in terms of like pushing other entities in the federal government? Mm-hmm. What can we do to encourage and to demand more research on infection control in order to care for patients?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think maybe NIDCR is a good example of an institute that it should probably look to do more in this area. And, if you look at the research initiatives that the NIDCR has announced this year, COVID-19 research, looking at understanding oral human infection with people living with HIV, things like that, the kind of work they've been doing, you don't see much in the way of the kind of research you're describing. So infectious disease. And I think that I think we have an opportunity here, again, in the new Congress to expand, for example, this institute's work in this area of basic research. Remember that Congress can really set the agenda, at least partially, for NIH. So if Congress believes there is an area that is being under-researched, underserved by the federal government, Congress can make a point of passing legislation and maybe including language in the appropriations bills that will direct an agency to do more in a particular area. So I do think there are opportunities coming up in this new Congress. I think this is something we should think quite a bit about and look at institutes, not just the NIDCR, but other institutes that maybe should step up their research in this area.
Well, that's great, and I'm sure we'll be having conversations with you how to assist us in talking to our legislators and some of the great work. It's interesting as a sidebar. The last travel I personally did, and maybe for many of us, was to D.C. for our annual days of hearing from you and our colleagues in Heber, our lobby days, so to speak, our policy days. And that was early March. We were all sitting in the room together, and it was just about 10 days prior to the shutdown. So here we are today
right.
talking about all this. Quite interesting.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good transition, Mike, into the last segment of our conversation today. And, just briefly, as you always do with us in person, to comment on the elections. And I'll start with it and the presidential elections and where the race stands. And this is not a political take. Well, maybe it is, but it's more about its potential impact on us and the work we're doing.
Yes. Well, just taking a quick look at where we stand on the presidential race, I don't think this debate this week has changed things, the dynamics of this race. I think most people have made up their minds. There's a small group of undecided voters. But if you look at the national polls, Biden has kept about an 8-point lead consistently for the past several months. But the real battle, as we all know, will be for the 270 electoral votes. And so the battle is going to really come down to about 6 states: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina. Those are really the big swing states. There are other states that the President Trump is having to defend that he would rather not defend, such as Ohio and Iowa and Georgia. And there are some states that Vice President Biden has to defend, like New Hampshire and Minnesota. But when you look at it, it really comes down to those 6 states, and sort of where the race stands is really sort of looking at those 6 states. So, for example, Florida and North Carolina, Biden has averaged about a 1 to 2 point lead consistently in those 2 states, well within the margin of error, but has led. Michigan and Wisconsin, Biden has led from anywhere from 5 to 7 points in those 2 states. And then in Pennsylvania and Arizona, Biden has led consistently with 3 to 5 points. So if the election were held now, it's likely it would be a Biden win simply from an electoral standpoint. I think he's probably got the 270 and then some at this point, but we're a long way still from the election. Anything can happen between now and then.
Yeah, and I want to remind our listeners that we're recording this podcast about 10 days or so before you're hearing it. So even by then, things could be different.
That's
never know, right?
Exactly right, Joel. That's right.
Yeah,
and likely will be.
Exactly. And I want to, by the way, I live in Arizona. So speaking of being a closed state, I can't remember the last time I saw a non-political ad on TV. I look forward to that day. Maybe that'll happen on November 5th or 4th. Anyway.
Yes.
So maybe briefly on the Senate elections and how you see that going.
Sure. So the Senate currently stands 53 Republicans, 47 Democrats, and 2 of those Democrats are independents that caucus with the Democrats. So Democrats need to pick up 3 to 4 seats depending on who the president is. There is one Democrat who is struggling and could very well lose, and that's Doug Jones of Alabama. So if he loses, Democrats need to pick up 4 to 5 seats. Right now, there are 2 Republican seats that lean Democratic. That's McSally in Arizona, and as you mentioned, Joel, and Gardner in Colorado. Both of those seats are leaning Democrat and look likely to go Democrat. So that's 2 seats. There are 4 others that are considered Republican toss-up seats, and that's Georgia with Perdue, Iowa with Ernst, Maine with Collins, Montana with Daines. I would also throw North Carolina Tillis in there as well. Latest polls I've seen have Collins in Maine down by about 4 points to Sarah Gideon. And then, of course, there are 3 other seats that lean Republican, including South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. Latest polls I've seen there show him essentially tied with Jamie Harrison. So all that is to say, no one knows at this point. Democrats are working hard. They know that if Biden were to win, if the Democrats don't control the Senate, then it's going to be difficult for Joe Biden to get policy agenda through the Congress. So I think the chances right now of Democrats picking up the Senate probably better than 50%.
Yeah. And as mentioned, things could be very different in 10 days.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. And then finally, the House, the Democrats have control, and your comments on the House elections.
Sure. Well, Democrats do control 232 seats to 198 seats. So there are about 4 vacancies, I think, right now in the House. So if you recall, in 2018, Democrats gained 40 seats to take over the House. Remember that in the House, particularly, even more so than the Senate, the majority runs everything, not just committees and subcommittees, but the floor as well. No legislation comes to the floor unless the majority party says it can. So controlling the House is crucial to both parties. I think the Republicans thought early on that they could make some inroads into that 40-seat differential. It looks now like Republicans could pick up 5 seats, but it could be Democrats picking up 5 seats. So that's about the margin we're looking at. I don't think Republicans have a shot this year in taking the House back. They have a shot at picking up a seat or 2. Also, the Democrats could pick up a seat or 2. So I think things stay the same in the House. And that's good for the Academy, only because we've been working with that Appropriations Committee and the members on that committee and the staff on that committee for the past couple of years, so we know them very well. But if Republicans were to take the House, it would be fine as well. The Academy is bipartisan. We work with both parties equally, so either way would be good for the Academy.
And I think that's an important point that we've said throughout, and that's regardless of the political circumstance and who the actual folks are who win and regardless of party, the work we've done together over the years has given us the solid infrastructure for success. It's just been incredible.
Absolutely.
And Mike, with that note, I want to thank you for being with us today on Pedo Teeth Talk. It's been a pleasure for me, and our members are really going to benefit from hearing from you personally.
Wonderful. It's been a great experience, Joel. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And thank you to our audience for listening into Pedo Teeth Talk today, where we bring you the contemporary issues important to you and your practice, brought to you by the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry. We'll see you here next time.
Do you need additional CE hours but don't have time to travel to courses? Did you attend annual session and want to listen to the audio recordings? check out AAPD's new Education Passport. The redesigned and improved Education Passport is AAPD's online learning center, where you can earn CE and listen to audio recordings from all of our continuing education courses and more. Visit educationpassport.aapd.org for more information. For 10% off any product, use discount code TEETHTALK in the Education Passport store.
Pedo Teeth Talk is brought to you by the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry, the show that delivers cutting-edge ideas for the professional specializing in pediatric dentistry. If you have any questions or comments, please email info@aapd.org. We welcome your ideas for future shows and guests. For more information on the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry, visit aapd.org.